The old suitcase looked like it had traveled 1,000 miles too many. Its corners were scuffed. The leather was cracked. One of the buckles had been repaired with a piece of string. It sat beside a wooden bench in the waiting area of the bus station, and next to it sat Margaret Wilson. Most people who passed through the station never noticed her. They were too busy checking schedules, carrying luggage, or hurrying to wherever life was taking them. Margaret wasn't going anywhere. At 68 years old, she found herself in a situation she had never imagined. For nearly 7 years, she had cared for her younger sister Helen, who had been battling cancer. When Helen's health declined, Margaret had left her own apartment and moved into her sister's small house in another city. She had put her own life on hold without hesitation. There had been hospital visits, medication schedules, sleepless nights, long conversations when fear made sleep impossible. And through it all, Margaret had stayed. Because that's what family did. 6 months earlier, Helen had passed away peacefully. The grief was hard enough. But then came the hard reality. The apartment Margaret had rented before moving away had long since been given up. The few savings she had were nearly gone after funeral expenses, and the relatives she thought might help were dealing with their own struggles. Or so they said. So one rainy Tuesday afternoon, carrying everything she owned in a single worn suitcase, Margaret arrived in the small town of Maple Grove. She didn't know anyone there. But to hear the bus ticket had been affordable. And she had found a cheap bedside. The station café was nearly empty. A few travelers drank coffee while waiting for buses. Behind the counter stood Frank Barnes. Frank had owned the café for almost 20 years. He was the kind of man who remembered people's orders before they spoke. Large coffee, 2 sugars, blueberry muffin. He noticed details. And he noticed Margaret. She had ordered only a cup of tea. The tea had long gone cold, yet she remained seated at the same table, looking out the window, watching the rain, thinking. Frank walked over. "Would you like a refill?" Margaret smiled politely. "Oh, no thank you. I'm fine." Frank nodded, but something about her answer did not feel fine. Polite, but not fine. The next morning Margaret returned. Again she ordered tea. Again she sat quietly for hours. And Frank watched her. Around lunchtime, he carried a sandwich to her table. I think the kitchen accidentally made an extra one. Margaret immediately shook her head. "Oh, I couldn't." "Sure you can." "But I didn't order it." Frank smiled. "Then it's lucky I did." For a moment Margaret looked as though she might cry. Instead she whispered, "Thank you," and accepted the sandwich. Over the next week, they developed a routine. Margaret arrived in the morning, ordered tea, read old newspapers, sat by the window. Frank learned small pieces of her story, a conversation here, a memory there. Eventually he understood the truth. Margaret wasn't waiting for a bus. She didn't have anywhere to go. One evening after closing, Frank sat with his friend Walter, a retired school principal. "There's a woman at the cafe," Frank explained. "She's fallen on hard times." Walter listened carefully. "Does she need money?" Frank thought for a moment. "No." "Then what does she need?" Frank stared through the cafe window. "Honestly, I think she needs people." The next morning Walter came and introduced himself to Margaret. She expected another polite conversation. Instead, Walter asked about her life. Not her problems. Her life. The books she liked. The places she'd lived. The students she'd once taught piano lessons to. The sister she missed. For the first time in months, someone was interested in who Margaret was, not just what had happened to her. The conversation lasted 2 hours. Neither noticed. A few days later, Walter brought a friend of his, Linda, the town librarian. Linda had a gift for solving practical problems. After hearing Margaret's story, she asked a simple question. "When was the last time you updated your resume?" Margaret laughed. "Probably before smartphones existed." "Then let's start there." The following week became surprisingly busy. Margaret spent her mornings at the library now. Linda helped her create a resume. She learned how to use online job boards, how to send emails, how to search local opportunities. Some things felt intimidating. Some things felt impossible. But Linda never rushed her. Each small success became a victory. One afternoon, a florist named Grace entered the library. She was looking for information about small business permits. She already had her shop and wanted to expand. Linda introduced the two women. During the conversation, Grace discovered that Margaret loved flowers. Always had. Margaret spoke about roses, lilies, carnations, and gardenias with remarkable enthusiasm. And she told the two women about the language of flowers, a language known for many centuries and now almost forgotten. A rose for passionate love if red, or for purity or farewell when white. The meaning of gerberas, you lighten up my life, or that lilacs stood for spring and first love. Grace smiled. "Would you like to help at my shop a few days each week?" Margaret blinked. "You mean, work there?" "Only if you'd like to." Margaret hadn't expected employment. She hadn't expected anyone to trust her. And the following Monday, she began helping arrange floral displays. The work wasn't glamorous. There were buckets to clean, deliveries to organize, shelves to stock, but Margaret loved it. For the first time since her sister's death, she had somewhere to be. Someone expecting her. A reason to get up each morning. Weeks turned into months. Margaret found a tiny flat near the flower shop. She had her own place again. People in town began looking for reasons to visit the flower shop. Some came for flowers, as was normal. More and more came because they wanted to talk to Margaret, to ask her about the meaning of the flowers they bought. She always greeted them warmly, remembered their names, asked about their families. Grace expanded the shop. They worked in 2 rooms now, the sales area and a second room, solely designated for flower arrangements that were intended to convey messages. After an article in the local papers, the shop and Margaret became famous in the whole region. The woman who had arrived feeling invisible slowly became one of the town's most familiar faces. Then winter arrived, and with it came trouble. Winter was no time for flowers. Business slowed dramatically. Grace worried. Small businesses survived month to month, sometimes week to week. One snowy evening, Margaret told Grace not to worry about scheduling her. "If things are difficult, I understand." Grace shook her head. "No. What do you mean? You helped keep this place going. Now we'll help keep you going. I know this town. We are a community." The next morning, a local teacher ordered flowers for a school event. Then a dentist placed an order. And the community center. Then the church. Then dozens of residents. Word had spread. Not because anyone asked for charity, because people genuinely cared. They wanted their flower shop to survive. They wanted Margaret to stay. And for perhaps the first time in her life, Margaret understood what it felt like to belong somewhere. Spring arrived. The town square filled with color. Trees blossomed. Outdoor tables reappeared. and life felt lighter. One afternoon, Frank walked into the flower shop. Margaret was arranging a display of yellow tulips. "You look busy," Frank said. Margaret laughed. "Imagine that." Frank glanced toward the old suitcase sitting on a shelf in the back room. "You still have it." "I do. Maybe you should throw it away." Margaret looked at the suitcase. The worn leather, the broken buckle, the faded handle. Then she shook her head. "No." "Why not?" Margaret smiled softly. "Because every time I see it, I remember where I started." A few weeks later, the town hosted its annual spring festival. Food stands lined the streets. Children played games. Musicians performed on a small outdoor stage. Near the center of the square stood a booth decorated with flowers. Margaret was helping customers when the mayor approached. He carried a small plaque. "Margaret Wilson?" She looked surprised. "Yes." The mayor smiled. "On behalf of Maple Grove, we'd like to thank you." "For what?" "For reminding us what community looks like." Margaret stared at him, confused. The mayor continued. "When you arrived, people helped you. But somewhere along the way, you started helping everyone else." He gestured around the festival. The teachers, shop owners, students, retirees, families, friends. People sitting together. People laughing together. People talking. Connecting. You brought people closer. Margaret's eyes filled with tears, because she suddenly realized something. The town had saved her, but she had changed the town too. She presented the mayor with a hydrangea. "This means thank you," she told him. And he took it with an enthusiastic smile. That evening, after the festival ended, Margaret sat on a bench in the town square. The same old suitcase rested beside her. Frank joined her. Then Walter, Linda, Grace. One by one, friends gathered nearby. The sky glowed orange as the sun disappeared behind the hills. For a long moment, nobody spoke. They simply enjoyed being together. Finally, Frank nodded toward the suitcase. "So, still not throwing it away?" Margaret laughed. "Not a chance." Everyone smiled, because they understood. The suitcase wasn't a reminder of hardship anymore. It was proof. Proof that life could change. Proof that kindness mattered. Proof that sometimes the people who save us are ordinary strangers who simply decide to care. And proof that even when someone arrives with nothing more than an old suitcase and nowhere to go, a community can help them find a home. Sometimes the greatest acts of kindness aren't dramatic or heroic. Sometimes they're a sandwich offered by a café owner, a conversation from a retired teacher, a helping hand from a librarian, or a job offered by a florist. Small gestures. Ordinary people. Yet together, they can completely change a life. And perhaps that's what community really is. Not a place, but people who choose not to let one another face life's hardest moments alone.